The CEO stood in the middle of his company's headquarters, but no one recognized him. He had swapped his tailored suit for a worn-out janitor's uniform, complete with an old cap pulled low over his face. For years, he had built this company from the ground up, trusting his managers to run things properly. But lately, he had noticed something was off. Profits were declining, customer complaints were increasing, and employee morale was at an all-time low. He could have sent investigators. He could have ordered audits. But numbers and reports didn't reveal the truth. People did. So, he had decided to go undercover and see for himself. As he pushed a mop across the marble floors, employees rushed past him without a second glance. Some were busy, but many stood around chatting, laughing, and scrolling on their phones during work hours. Then, he noticed something troubling. A middle-aged employee, dressed in simple work clothes, was being scolded in front of the entire office. "You'll never move up in this company," a superior sneered. "You're slow, you're weak, and you should be grateful we even let you work here." The CEO froze. No one stepped in to help. The room was filled with silent onlookers, pretending not to hear the insults. The employee didn't argue back. Instead, they lowered their gaze, swallowed their pride, and continued working. The CEO's grip tightened on the mop handle. This wasn't the company he had built. But before he could dwell on it, something else caught his attention. A group of well-dressed executives huddled near the glass meeting room, speaking in hushed voices. The CEO casually moved closer, pretending to wipe down a nearby table. "What if someone finds out?" one of them whispered. "They won't," another assured. "As long as we keep the numbers clean, no one will notice the missing funds." The CEO's heartbeat quickened. Fraud? Corruption? He had suspected laziness, maybe even some minor workplace issues. But this was on an entirely different level. He kept his face neutral, pretending to struggle with a stubborn stain on the table. But inside, his mind was racing. Just how deep did this corruption go? His undercover journey had just begun, and already, he had seen more than he ever expected. Then, as he turned a corner, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A secret meeting was happening in a back office. The lights were dimmed, and the blinds were shut. Several employees entered, whispering urgently to each other. What were they hiding? The CEO knew one thing: he couldn't stop now. Cliffhanger, the truth about his own company was worse than he ever imagined. The CEO kept his head down, gripping the mop handle tightly as he moved closer to the dimly lit office. His heart pounded as he saw the door slightly ajar, revealing a group of employees gathered inside. A senior manager stood at the center, speaking in a low voice. "We need to be careful. If corporate finds out what we've been doing, it's over for all of us." Another employee, nervously adjusting their tie, responded, "How much have we taken so far?" "Enough," the manager smirked. "And if we keep playing our cards right, we'll bleed this place dry before anyone notices." The CEO felt a knot form in his stomach. His company, the one he had spent years building, was being drained from the inside. These weren't just lazy employees or careless supervisors. This was theft. This was betrayal. He backed away before anyone could spot him, his mind racing. He needed more information. Who else was involved? How far did this corruption go? As he continued his janitorial duties, he observed the workplace dynamics more closely. Some employees were working hard, but others were taking advantage of the system. He noticed a group in the break room, laughing as they exaggerated their overtime hours on their timesheets. "The higher-ups are so clueless," one of them scoffed. "As long as we pad the numbers just right, they won't question a thing." The CEO gritted his teeth but kept his cover. Then, he saw the same hard-working employee from earlier, the one who had been humiliated in front of everyone. They were stacking files, moving quickly while their supervisor stood over them. "Faster," the supervisor snapped. "You're useless at this pace." The employee nodded silently, picking up speed. The CEO felt anger rise inside him. It was clear that this was a culture of fear, where bullies thrived, and hard work was ignored. But as he moved toward the janitor's closet, something else caught his attention. A group of employees had gathered in a corner, whispering. One of them, a nervous-looking worker, lowered their voice. "Have you heard? There's a rumor that someone in corporate is watching. They think something big is about to happen." The others laughed. "Corporate never pays attention to what we do down here." The CEO smiled slightly to himself. They were wrong. He was here. And he wasn't leaving until he uncovered the full truth. Cliffhanger: the CEO realizes his company is losing millions due to internal fraud, and he is just getting started. The CEO, still disguised as a janitor, leaned against the supply closet door, his mind racing. He had uncovered a web of corruption within his company: fraud, dishonesty, and mistreatment of loyal employees. But there was still more to learn. As he mopped the floors, he kept a close eye on the one employee who seemed different, the same person who had been humiliated in front of the office. They worked harder than anyone else, rarely taking breaks, always keeping their head down. But their supervisor? A complete tyrant. "Why are you still here?" the supervisor sneered as they walked past. "I should have fired you a long time ago. You have no future in this company." The employee flinched but said nothing, focusing on their work. The CEO clenched his fists. He had seen enough mistreatment in his lifetime, but watching it unfold right in front of him, within his own company, was unbearable. Then something happened that made his blood boil. A high-ranking executive walked by and saw the interaction. Instead of stepping in, they smirked. "Still clinging to that worthless employee, huh?" they chuckled, looking at the supervisor. "Some people just don't belong in a real business." The CEO felt his stomach turn. This wasn't just an abusive supervisor. The culture of cruelty came from the top. The people he had trusted to run his company had turned it into a playground for power-hungry manipulators. The hard-working employee quietly picked up their things and continued working as if nothing had happened. But the CEO could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the weight of years of being undervalued and disrespected. And yet, they kept going. He had seen enough. Later that evening, when the office was nearly empty, the CEO left a handwritten note at the hard-working employee's desk. "Meet me at the coffee shop down the street at 8 a.m. No one else can know." The next morning, he waited at the small cafe, still dressed in his janitor disguise. The employee walked in, hesitant but curious. They looked around before spotting the CEO in the corner. He gestured for them to sit. "I know what's happening in that office," he said, lowering his voice. "And I know you do too." The employee stiffened. I don't want any trouble." "You're not in trouble," the CEO assured them. "But I need to understand something. Why do you stay?" The employee sighed, staring down at their hands. "Because I need this job. Because people like me don't get second chances. No one fights for us. We either take the abuse or we lose everything." The CEO felt a surge of respect. This person wasn't weak. They were surviving in an impossible situation. He made a decision right then and there. Cliffhanger: the CEO decides to secretly test the employee's loyalty, but the results will shock him. The CEO couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than he had originally thought. The hardworking employee had shown resilience, unwavering in the face of mistreatment. But something about their nervousness, their reluctance to trust anyone, gnawed at him. He needed to know whether they would stand by him when the truth finally came out. Over the next few days, he quietly observed the employee, always remaining in the background, never drawing attention to himself. But something didn't add up. Every time the employee was confronted by their ruthless supervisor, their anxiety seemed to grow deeper. Then, on a quiet afternoon, he followed the employee discreetly after work. They walked hurriedly down the street, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The CEO stayed just far enough behind, keeping his distance. The employee stopped at a corner store and, for a brief moment, hesitated before entering. The CEO approached the store cautiously, trying to remain out of view. He peeked inside just in time to see the employee slip a small envelope into a mailbox. His heart skipped a beat. The envelope was stamped with a name, someone in the company's upper management. The employee hadn't been sending a letter or a personal note, they were sending something far more dangerous. As the employee walked away, the CEO slipped into the store, asking the clerk about the mailbox. "That's the place where a lot of people drop off documents for the higher-ups," the clerk said, avoiding eye contact. The CEO felt a cold sweat break out across his back. What was going on here? Was the employee, the one he had been so impressed with, part of this deception all along? Was it possible they were working with the corrupt managers he had been investigating? He needed answers, but he couldn't act too soon. He had to be careful. Later that evening, he confronted the employee at the same coffee shop, this time without his janitor disguise. "I saw you at the mailbox today," the CEO said, his voice low but firm. "What were you sending?" The employee froze. Panic swept across their face as they looked around the cafe, ensuring no one else could hear. I didn't want you to find out this way," they stammered. "I had no choice." "Who are you working for?" The CEO's voice was steady but filled with an urgency he couldn't contain. The employee lowered their gaze, tears welling up in their eyes. "I've been blackmailed by the supervisor. He has leverage over me, threats. He said if I didn't do this, I would lose my job, my family would suffer, and I would have nothing left." The CEO was stunned. The employee hadn't betrayed him. They had been forced into a corner, manipulated by someone who had no mercy. "I didn't know what else to do," the employee continued, voice breaking. "I didn't want to get involved, but I had to. I'm sorry." The CEO's heart softened. He had been wrong to doubt them. The employee was trapped, just as much as he had been when he first started this undercover operation. He leaned in closer, speaking quietly. "You've been strong, and you're not alone anymore. I'll help you." Cliffhanger: the CEO realizes someone in his own executive team is involved, and now it's time to go after them, but not without a risk. The CEO couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous this investigation became. The employee, whom he now knew had been manipulated, wasn't the only one caught in this web of corruption. No, there was something bigger at play, a conspiracy hidden in the shadows of the company's most trusted circles. His heart raced as he followed the employee back to the office the next day. After their meeting, he had formulated a plan. He couldn't just rely on words anymore. It was time to act, to confront the people responsible for the fraud, the manipulation, and the suffering. But he had to be careful. That evening, after most employees had left for the day, the CEO crept through the hallways, avoiding security cameras and any potential witnesses. He had learned that a secret meeting was planned, a meeting that, judging by the tone of the conversations he had overheard, would reveal the full extent of the company's corruption. The meeting was being held in a large conference room at the end of the building, an area rarely used by anyone other than the senior leadership team. The CEO stood outside, listening carefully as voices murmured inside. "Did you bring the files?" a voice asked. "Yes," another responded. "Everything's in place. Tomorrow, we'll begin the next phase. Once we've cleared the remaining checks, the deal will go through." The CEO felt his heart sink. They were talking about a deal a deal that had nothing to do with the well-being of the company or its employees. It was about lining their own pockets, using the company's resources for their personal gain. He didn't know how far this went, but he knew one thing: this wasn't just about financial fraud. This was about betrayal. He couldn't wait any longer. It was time to confront them. The CEO moved quickly, slipping into the room unnoticed, hiding behind a pillar near the entrance. He could see the shadowy figures at the long table, but they couldn't see him. "I have to say, it feels good knowing no one will ever find out about this," one of the executives said with a smug grin. "Exactly. We've been running this company for years, and no one has ever suspected a thing. The money's ours, all ours," another chimed in. The CEO's fists clenched, his anger rising with each word. The very people he had trusted were using the company as their personal piggy bank. They were gambling with not only their jobs but the livelihoods of every single employee under their control. He made his move. Stepping forward, he knocked over a chair, drawing the attention of the room. The executives jumped in shock, quickly standing up and reaching for their phones, panic flashing in their eyes. But the CEO didn't flinch. "What is this? A meeting to steal from the very people who built this company?" A tense silence filled the room. No one moved, but the CEO could feel their fear. "How long have you been doing this?" the CEO demanded. "How many more of my employees are you willing to destroy for your own benefit?" One of the executives, a man the CEO recognized as a trusted ally, took a step forward, attempting to regain composure. "You don't understand. We had no choice. The company was failing. We had to do something to save it." The CEO stared at him coldly. "And you chose to destroy it instead?" The man hesitated, but his guilt was evident. "We thought we could fix it, in time." The CEO's mind raced. These were people he had worked with for years, people who had shared his vision for the company. But now, they were nothing more than criminals, manipulating the system for their own gain. "I don't care how you thought you could fix it," the CEO said, his voice calm but resolute. "What matters now is what happens next. You're done." Cliffhanger: the CEO realizes that the corruption runs deeper than he could have imagined. Someone in his executive team has been pulling the strings all along, and now the stakes are higher than ever. The CEO's world felt like it was collapsing in on him. Every step he took seemed to reveal another layer of deceit, another betrayal. He had thought he was close to exposing the truth, but now he realized the problem was much bigger than he had ever imagined. His own team, people he had trusted for years, were not only aware of the corruption, they were part of it. But there was one question left that he had to answer: how deep did the loyalty of his employees run? Was anyone truly trustworthy, or had he been surrounded by opportunists? He needed to know for sure. The employee, whom he had come to admire for their strength and dedication, was at the center of this storm. They had worked in silence for so long, bearing the weight of the company's corruption, and now the CEO had to decide: could they be trusted to help bring this all to an end, or were they just another pawn in a game of lies? The CEO decided it was time to test their loyalty. But how? It was simple, in a way. He would set a trap, something to see if the employee was truly aligned with the values that had once guided the company. He couldn't afford any more mistakes. He needed to know who he could rely on when the stakes were this high. The CEO called the employee into his office the next day, but instead of asking them to report to the front desk or to assist with a task, he gave them an unusual assignment. "I need you to meet someone," he said. "You'll be taking a package to a contact who has some sensitive information about the company's financial activities. It's vital we get it to them as soon as possible." The employee nodded, but their expression was unreadable. "I trust you," the CEO said. "You'll handle this discreetly, right?" The employee hesitated for a moment but nodded again. "I'll make sure it gets done." As they left the office, the CEO sat back in his chair, watching their every move through a hidden camera in the corner of the room. The package was a test, a piece of fake evidence he had planted earlier that would only matter if the employee had become part of the corrupt network. If they handed it off, if they betrayed him, he would know for sure. Time seemed to stretch as he waited, but he kept his cool. He had to. The stakes were too high now. Hours passed, and the employee didn't return. The CEO's nerves were starting to fray, and his patience was running thin. Was this a sign that his suspicion was right? Was he fooling himself, believing someone could actually be loyal in a world full of greed and corruption? Then, just as he was about to give up, the door opened. The employee stepped in, their face pale but determined. "I did it," they said, their voice steady. "I took the package to the contact. They were expecting it. Everything is in place." The CEO raised an eyebrow, his heart pounding. "Everything is in place," he repeated. "So, you're sure?" The employee nodded again. "Yes. I followed your instructions. No one saw me." For a brief moment, the CEO just stared at them. Then, he stood up from his desk and walked over. "You passed," he said quietly. The employee looked confused. "I don't understand." The CEO smiled, a rare moment of relief washing over him. "I had to know if I could trust you. You didn't just follow orders, you didn't run away. You did what was right, even when you had the chance to betray me. That's the kind of loyalty this company needs." But just as the words left his lips, the door burst open. A figure stepped in, the same senior executive who had been involved in the earlier meeting, his face twisted with anger. "You think you can just play with people like pawns?" the executive sneered, drawing a gun. "This company is mine. All of it. And if you think you're going to expose us, you're dead wrong." The employee froze, eyes wide. The CEO's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. "Put the gun down," the CEO said firmly. "You've already lost." Cliffhanger, the CEO faces his biggest threat yet, and the loyalty of his employee is put to the ultimate test. Who will walk away from this confrontation unscathed? The tension in the room was palpable. The CEO's gaze never left the man holding the gun, even as his own pulse quickened. He had been so careful, he had thought he had everything under control. But now, in this moment, the full weight of the situation crashed down on him. The senior executive, eyes blazing with fury, slowly advanced toward the CEO. "You should have known better," he sneered. "We've been planning this for years. All the money, all the deals, we made it happen. And now you come in here trying to ruin everything." The employee, standing frozen beside the CEO, looked back and forth between the two men, their face pale. The CEO could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else, a glimmer of hope, as if they were waiting for the right moment to act. "Is that what this has become?" the CEO asked, his voice steady but filled with determination. "You're willing to destroy everything you've built, just for personal gain?" The executive laughed bitterly. "Built? You think you built this? You were too busy playing CEO to see the rot within your own company. All the power, all the control, it's mine now. You were too naive to understand." "Not anymore," the CEO replied calmly, stepping forward. He kept his tone even, but his eyes were sharp. "I've been watching. I know everything. And I'm not going to let you get away with it." At that moment, the employee stepped forward, their fear melting into resolve. "I won't let you get away with it either," they said quietly, their voice trembling but strong. The executive's eyes flickered to the employee, momentarily distracted. And that was all it took. In one swift motion, the CEO grabbed the executive's arm, twisting it until the gun clattered to the floor. The senior executive let out a cry of frustration, but the CEO was quicker. With a move that seemed almost effortless, he pinned the man against the wall. "This ends now," the CEO said, his voice firm. "You're done." A silence hung in the room. The CEO stood tall, his hand still gripping the executive's arm as he caught his breath. The employee, wide-eyed and uncertain, stepped back. I didn't know what to do," the employee murmured, looking at the CEO. "I was afraid. I thought they'd destroy me if I didn't follow along." The CEO's eyes softened. He could understand that fear. He had seen it in the eyes of too many employees who felt trapped in a system designed to oppress them. But now, it was time for that system to crumble. "You didn't know, but now you do," the CEO said gently. "And together, we're going to fix it." He turned his attention to the senior executive, who was now struggling to free himself. "You're done. Everything you've been doing is about to come to light." But the executive just grinned, as if he had already won. "You think you've won, but you have no idea how deep this runs. You can't stop this. Not now. It's too late." The CEO paused. "Is it?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. With that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "I've already sent everything to the authorities. All your schemes, every last detail. There's nothing you can do now." The senior executive's face turned pale as he realized what had happened. You can't do this," he stammered. "You don't have proof." "Oh, but I do," the CEO said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "You've been too arrogant to see it, but I've been one step ahead the whole time." With that, he signaled to security, who had been waiting in the wings, ready for the moment the situation escalated. The senior executive was immediately restrained, his protests falling on deaf ears. The room was silent, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. The employee stood beside the CEO, their shoulders a little straighter, their eyes filled with admiration. "You did it," the employee said, a smile finally breaking across their face. "You actually did it." The CEO nodded, but his gaze was steady. "This is just the beginning. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. But together, we can rebuild this company. From the ground up." The employee looked up at him, their face glowing with newfound hope. As the senior executive was escorted out by security, the CEO turned to face the future with determination. He had fought the hardest battle of his career and come out victorious. But now, it was time to heal the wounds his company had suffered, and to ensure that no one would ever have to live in fear again. Cliffhanger, the CEO had won this battle, but the war for the company's soul had only just begun. He now faced the monumental task of restoring integrity and trust to the very foundation of his business. The dust had barely settled before the CEO called a company-wide meeting. The senior executive was gone, arrested for his involvement in the vast web of corruption, and the employees who had been complicit were now facing the consequences of their actions. The CEO knew he couldn't leave anything to chance. It was time to rebuild, but not before making sure that everyone understood the true cost of betrayal. The conference room was silent as employees, unsure of what was coming, filled the seats. They glanced around nervously, whispers spreading like wildfire. The CEO stood at the front, his posture resolute, as he watched them settle into place. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he allowed the weight of the situation to hang in the air, letting the tension build. Finally, he began. "Today marks a turning point for this company. What has happened in the past, what has been allowed to happen in this building, is unacceptable. But that ends now." The CEO paused, allowing the words to sink in. He could feel the eyes of the employees on him, some filled with guilt, some filled with hope. "I know many of you were scared. Some of you were manipulated, blackmailed, or threatened. But none of that justifies what has taken place. He glanced at a few faces in the room, people who had been complicit, who had watched corruption spread like a cancer. The truth hung in the room like a dark cloud. The ones who have been loyal will be rewarded. Those who have been dishonest will face the consequences of their actions. He turned to one of the managers at the back of the room. "You're fired. You will never work here again." The manager's face went pale, and they opened their mouth to protest, but the CEO's gaze silenced them instantly. "Don't waste your breath. You've already said everything that needed to be said." He turned back to the group. "I will not tolerate this kind of behavior, not now, not ever. We've lost trust, we've lost time, and we've lost employees who deserved better. But we will rebuild. Together." There was a long pause before a brave voice spoke up from the back. It was the same employee, the one who had stood by him, despite everything. "And how do we rebuild from here?" they asked, their voice clear but uncertain. The CEO smiled faintly. "By earning back that trust, one action at a time. Every single one of you will be held accountable for your actions from this point on. But there's a path forward. If you are willing to work hard, to show your commitment, then there is a place for you in this company." He paused again, his eyes scanning the room. "For those of you who've been loyal, thank you. You will be promoted, and you will be given the opportunity to lead this company into its next chapter. The ones who have turned this place into something it wasn't, leave. There's no room for you here anymore." The room remained eerily silent. It was a moment of reckoning for everyone present. The CEO had made it clear that this would not be a place for complacency, for dishonesty, or for selfish ambition. The company needed people who truly cared, people who were willing to do the right thing, even when it was hard. But as the meeting came to a close, there was something else. The smallest flicker of hope in the eyes of the remaining employees. It was the hope of redemption, of a fresh start. And then the CEO made one final announcement. "For those of you who have stuck by me, who have fought for this company through thick and thin, you're not just getting your jobs back. You're getting something more." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of envelopes, handing them to the employees who had shown dedication, hard work, and integrity. "These are promotions. You have earned them. Starting today, you are the future of this company." The room buzzed with whispered shock and awe. The employees who had fought, who had believed in what the company stood for, were being rewarded. Their loyalty had been recognized. But the CEO knew that this was just the beginning. He had rooted out the corruption, but it wasn't just about punishing the wrongdoers. It was about creating a new company, a company built on trust, respect, and hard work. And he would not rest until that vision was realized. But there was one more thing he had to do before everything could truly be set right. He turned to the employee who had stood by him through it all. "You're getting the promotion," he said, his voice warm with pride. "But more than that, I'm giving you a chance to lead." The employee's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't know if I'm ready for that." The CEO smiled. "You've been ready all along. You've shown the strength, the integrity, and the courage that a leader needs. You're the one who will help bring this company back to where it belongs." The employee, for the first time, smiled back, a smile that reached their eyes. It was the smile of someone who had finally been seen, finally been recognized. Cliffhanger, the company was on the verge of a new beginning, but the journey ahead would be long. As the CEO looked out at the room full of employees, he realized that the hardest part wasn't exposing the corruption, it was ensuring that it never returned. The real test was yet to come. The company was slowly but surely beginning to heal. The scars from the corruption, the betrayals, and the pain of lost trust were still fresh, but they were starting to fade. The CEO knew that rebuilding a company's reputation was no easy task, but he also knew it was worth the fight. He walked through the halls, now brighter, more vibrant than they had been in a long time. The walls, once adorned with expensive artwork meant to show off success, now displayed reminders of the company's core values: trust, respect, and integrity. He could hear employees talking, collaborating, laughing. The air was different. It wasn't just a workplace anymore, it had become a community. And it was all thanks to the changes that had been set in motion, the people who had stepped up, and the lessons learned through hard choices. The hard-working employee who had stood by him now sat in an office at the top floor. They had taken on a leadership role, just as the CEO had promised. They had earned it. And they were already starting to make their mark, transforming the company with fresh ideas and a sense of fairness that had been lacking for far too long. The CEO had kept his promise, and so had they. Together, they were ensuring that nothing like the betrayal of the past would ever happen again. But even as things seemed to be moving forward, the CEO knew there was always more work to be done. Every decision he made now had to reflect the lessons he had learned throughout this journey, lessons that could not be forgotten, no matter how much time passed. That night, as the CEO sat alone in his office, looking out over the city, he reflected on everything that had transpired. It had been a battle, a difficult, painful one. But it had also been a wake-up call. When he had first started the company, he had been driven by ambition, by the desire to build something lasting. But in the end, he had learned that success wasn't just about making money or winning deals. Success was about the people. He had let his focus drift away from what truly mattered, the well-being of his employees, their dignity, and their trust. And it had almost cost him everything. But the company had survived. And so had he. The hardest lesson, though, was the one he had to learn about leadership. True leadership wasn't about being at the top, it was about lifting others up, helping them rise, and creating a space where everyone could thrive. It was about building a foundation that couldn't be shaken, no matter the storm. As the CEO stood up from his desk, he knew that the company's future wasn't just in his hands anymore. It was in the hands of every employee, every person who had fought to rebuild what had been broken. The journey had been long, and it wasn't over yet. But now, more than ever, the CEO was certain of one thing: he had learned the greatest lesson of all. The true measure of success isn't what you achieve, but what you inspire others to achieve. And with that, the CEO walked out of his office, ready for whatever the future held, knowing that he had built a company and a team that would stand the test of time.